Hi, everybody. I'm Allison Freiberg, and welcome to Lecture 16, Slides, Slides, Slides. We're going to work on, strangely enough, designing slides for your presentations. Let's dive in. Okay, which of these statements rings true for you? 1, my slides are usually notes of what I say in my presentation, a kind of shorthand version of a script, basically. Number 2, I like to get all my data on my slides so the audience can see everything. Number 3, I've never really thought much about designing slides. I don't have the time anyway. Or number 4, I've seen amazing slides, but I don't know how to create them. Okay. I think the most common responses I get are number 1, that our slides are usually notes that we look at. Or number 4, we've all seen great slides, we're not really sure how to make them. So what we're going to do today is try to work on avoiding these tendencies here and seeing if we can introduce some basic principles to get some good slides going and create slides that are really going to captivate your audience rather than bore them to tears. Okay, here are the essentials we're going to look at. We're going to look at some design concepts. We're going to look at story, how to arrange items, your background, your colors, what kind of text you're going to put on your slides, images, how you're going to display data, and how you're going to use movement in your slides, or not. But if you're going to use movement, here are some ideas on how to do that. Okay. Here's some guiding concepts, just conceptual concepts. Your slides are not for you. We need to really remember that they are for your audience. They're not there as a script for you to read off of. They're not even there as a mini teleprompter, if you will, to jog your memory about what you have to say. We should really be designing our slides for our audience. And I'd like to invite you to think of a slide as an idea that you're putting forth. You're not just throwing information on a slide, you're not just filling it up, you're not just throwing tables on there. It is an idea that you're trying to communicate with your audience. Oh, and about that audience of yours, they can listen to you or they can read your slide, but they can't do both. And more often than not, the slide always wins. So if you've got your slides just jam-packed with information, or words and information, or words, numbers, and information, your audience is going to be looking at all that stuff on your slide and not hearing a word you say. Please remember, and this goes back to the presentations that deliver lecture. This is about you, your audience, and your message. A great slide never won a room, but a bad deck can really lose one. There are all sorts of app options. Okay. I actually tend to use PowerPoint most of the time because I'm trying to use a Redlands University, patterns and templates and stuff. So I tend to design my own slides in PowerPoint. I highly recommend using Canva. It's a great free app that does a lot of the design heavy lifting for you. And that one on the right is actually the icon for Prezi. And Prezi is Prezi is an application that really focuses on, they would say, the narrative construction of the presentation, that they're really story-based. What's interesting about Prezi, for those of you who don't know, is all your information is kind of in one picture, and then your clicks, every time you click, you zoom in on a space and then you zoom out again. So everything's there on the table, and you zoom in and zoom out at certain pieces of information. It's a great program. Again, depending on what you're trying to do, I try to be comfortable in all three of these, and depending on what I'm trying to do, I might use Canva, I might use PowerPoint, I might use Prezi for non-lecture materials. Get this book. This is Nancy Duarte's Slideology. And what's fascinating about this book to me is it really is in for the long haul on design principles. You know, trends change, but design principles are design principles. And she really hones in on principles that were relevant 30 years ago to when she wrote this about 8 years ago to now. And it is very, very helpful. A lot of her concepts are in here. I'll call them out as we move forward. But this is a great book to get your hands on if you're all interested in slide design. I think story matters. Story matters. We all know the basic movements of story, and we can actually construct our slides for our presentation to convey a sense of story. What do I mean by that? Let's think about what good stories have. There's a journey. Where are we? Where will we go? How will we get there? There are heroes and villains. Who should we be rooting for? Where is the obstacle? There's conflict usually. You can identify any conflict or contrast in perspectives. Now, when we're talking about business presentations, it's not that we're writing short stories, we're not, but we are leveraging the power of narrative and the techniques of narrative to help clarify our messages. We introduced this concept in the earlier lecture on presentations, and I want to reiterate it here. If you can get your audience involved in the journey of this presentation, if we can know who we're rooting for and where the obstacle is, if we can identify the conflict, and if we can be surprised and be drawn to that in some way, we will develop a really strong relationship between presenter, audience, and message. You can even try to storyboard a beginning, a middle, and an end, which sounds kind of obvious, but I think you will be amazed to know that very few presenters construct their slide decks with the idea of a beginning, a middle, and an end. Usually what I see is really just a series of slides with a bunch of information and words dumped onto them. There's no sense of story. There's no sense of beginning, a middle, and end. There's no sense of resolution, of conflict introduced. It's just random. It's just stuff tossed onto a slide. And that's not helping you. Try to think of a beginning, a middle, and an end. You may even think of terms of chapters or sections. If you're dramatic, you may think in terms of acts. But break it up and create that story if you can. I also think that people should know where they are in the story. And by that I mean, like, look, I often do when I have a lot of slides and it's a little too much for people to remember the sense of story going on. I usually will make a marker like this, so a little tab, so we know when we're in the story section. I tend to keep them the Redlands maroon color, but maybe, if it's particularly long, you might change colors. You might do all sorts of things, just maybe a little triangle in the corner. I don't know, but just give people a sense of where they are in this so that the slides don't just become endless random pieces of information. And each slide should tell what I call a tiny story. Now, I came up with this idea because obviously most of my learning comes from failure. And I was teaching the consultancy course, and we were doing mock cases and mock presentations before they actually worked with the client. And I was trying to tell people, stop putting so many words on your slides. They're so text heavy. They're really just serving as a script or a teleprompter for you. Come on, get away from that. And what happened was that people really got away from the number of words, but they didn't get away from having the slides serve as a teleprompter for them, for the presenter. So what happened was I would get these slides with just like a few single random words on the slide that were really there to jog the memory of the presenter. It meant nothing to the audience. So sure, there were fewer words, but those words weren't created for the audience. And so I revised the way I articulated this, because obviously I didn't communicate it well, to think about each slide being an idea, being a tiny story. You need to give a bit of a directive. In this case, each slide should tell a tiny story. Is that directive? Right? What should people take away from this slide? Well, that's what people should take away. And I get that as an audience member, and it's still useful for me as a presenter. This is a concept from Duarte. And again, we did cover it in the presentation one. I'm okay with us reviewing it here. Okay. She suggests we try to amplify the gap between what is and what could be. And that's a real storytelling technique. She says, all good presentations, like all good stories, convey and resolve some kind of conflict or imbalance. The sense of discord is what makes audiences care enough to get on board. Okay, I get it. There's something that is and something that could be, and I want to lead my audience to what could be. And if I'm using storytelling principles well, maybe I want to amplify that gap a bit. Really make a contrast between what is and what could be. How does that happen? And here's my example. Here I'm describing what is. The International Business course provides a textbook history of successful companies and the practices employed. That's pretty dull. I've intentionally made that pretty dull. It's completely accurate. It's just dull. International Business course. Textbook. Textbook's like the worst word in the English language. History. Successful companies? Which companies? I can't see successful companies. It means a million things to a million people. And the practices employed. Well, what practices? I can't see any of this. And to make this even more boring, look at that. I believe I used Times New Roman, the dullest of all fonts. And nothing's highlighted. Yeah, it pops off the rock, sure, so it's easy to read, but it's completely dull. I'm bored reading this. I hope you are too. But if I want to lead you to what could be, maybe I'm going to talk about, on my Redlands study abroad, I'm going to network with entrepreneurs in Croatia, visit blockchain startups in Slovenia, and shadow a wine exporter in Italy. Look what I've done here. I've replaced the vague terms with specifics. Croatia, Slovenia, Italy, wine exporter, entrepreneur. I've used active verbs. I'm going to network. I'm going to shadow. And I've used those specific words that elicit a picture, I've actually made pop in red. And I've given myself here a nice window in white to make it pop off the page. And you know what else I did? Look at that, even the formatted background. I have the little Game of Thrones person here jumping from here to here because I'm going to use absolutely everything I can to make people want to be here and not want to be here. Is that manipulative? Of course it is. All language is manipulated. I'm going to leverage all the skills and narrative technique and storytelling principles and design principles to be persuasive, to be resoundingly persuasive for the people listening to me. All right. Arranging elements on a slide. One idea per slide. One idea per slide. There might be a couple of components to that idea, but if you're trying to put 5 major ideas onto a slide, the only thing that's going to do is make people not listen to you and only look at your slide. And if that's the case, send them your slide deck and don't bother presenting. One idea per slide. Then people can listen to you about the idea. People should get your slide in 3 seconds. Now, obviously, there's going to be some exceptions to that. Of course there is. However, in general, you can tell that tiny story of a slide. You can tell that tiny story of an idea in a few seconds, because after those few seconds, someone's going to start listening to you again. This is from the Duarte book, and it's her guidance on how to use contrast to guide people to your point. A major concept in slide design is to make sure you're guiding your audience to what you want them to see, rather than letting them roam all over your slide. And you can do that, Duarte says, by working with size differences. So your eye's going to be drawn to this circle that's bigger. You can do it with shape. Maybe you'll change the shape of something so that your eye's going to be drawn to the triangle. Maybe you're going to use a different shade. Maybe, and this is what I tend to use a contrast color to draw my audience's attention to what I want them to see. Or you can use location. You can put something sort of out of the boundaries a little bit of what one would expect. I tend not to use this because I just want to move that dot back. So I tend not to use that technique, but these are all techniques that will help you use contrast to guide people to your point. Create flow for readers' eyes. Now, in English, we read from left to right and then down the page, right? So look how I created these. Create flow for readers' eyes. I actually positioned those words in the way that we would read a paragraph, even though it's not a paragraph. I also used this photograph, which is actually the beach. I made that photograph, and you notice everything's kind of flowing this way. So it's encouraging me to move down the page. And you know what? Even if I only paid attention to this slide for 1 second, I'm drawn to the word flow because I've changed the background and the print. Okay, so it's the thing that stands out. Okay, that's how you can create flow. Hierarchy does build relationships in slides, not in life. So the bigger your thing is, the more important you're suggesting we interpret it as. And you'd be surprised how many times I see people's headings end up being much smaller font than the body of their text in a slide. And it's no. Most important thing is biggest, least important thing is smallest. Try to use a grid system to compose your slide. You notice these dotted lines here? You see them on your phones all the time. It's the rule of thirds, a basic photography principle. So that if you divide your slide up into this kind of Brady Bunch formation here, what you want to think about is see where those intersections are? Those are going to be your focal points. And you want to put your things at those focal points. So in this case, here's the speaker, here's, their head. This is, we're going to focus on that. Here's a shoulder, here's a microphone. And you know what, over here, there really wasn't anything on the photo, nothing, and it's intentionally blurred here. So I thought, well, that's a good place to put the words, my tiny little story that I needed to tell. Put it right here. The white pops nicely. I think I did it in 3D, so there's a little more pop to it. Pops out a little more. It's an easy slide to read. You get that sense of composition. You do this all the time when you're editing photos on your phones. Just take that on over to a slide as well. And this is another photography principle. I actually like to photograph things, especially during my travels. And a dear friend of mine is the photography professor at the University of Redlands. And she noticed I have a real tendency to pull in tight on my subjects. And she said, Allison, let your photos breathe, embrace some space sometimes. You'll tell a different story. And I invite you to do that for your slides too. Sometimes it's very powerful to have your little tiny story and then you just let a lot of the space around it just be. Now, in this case, obviously, I've used a background, which helps in terms of composition, but you're just drawn to this one little sentence, and then we can talk about it. All right. Backgrounds, colors, and text. Try to remember that your backgrounds are a surface. Okay, and it's important to be really consistent and purposeful with your choices. Please try to stay away from those weird little PowerPoint templates that are just like abstract stuff that's taking up space in your slides and has no content-driven intention for the story you're trying to tell. All it's doing is taking up room and creating a fake table, if you will. But if you think about your backgrounds as a table you're going to set, be intentional about what you're putting on that surface. And choose a color palette. You do not need all the colors. You really don't. I tend to use Redlands colors because obviously I'm presenting for the University of Redlands. And then I tend to add my little pop, my little orange pop to help guide my audience's eyes. Keep that palette consistent across your deck. And get comfortable with the color wheel. Know that green and red are complementary colors, that yellow and purple are, that blue and orange are. If you're going to use multiple shades of orange, make sure they're distinguishable, right? just think about that color wheel. Think intentionally about the colors you're using. If you have to use organizational colors, great. People have already done that for you. But try not to then go completely in the other direction and introduce 5 more colors, because that's not going to be helpful for your audience. Choose fonts that eyes like. Okay, usually in presentations you'll use sans serif fonts. Those are the ones without the little tails on them. They're a little easier to read, especially if you don't have a ton of text on your slide. And please make it bigger than you think it needs to be. If you've got great eyesight, good for you. But a lot of people, it's just going to really help if that font is bigger, especially as we're presenting virtually and everyone's looking on different devices. Bigger is better. Banish the bullet points. 99% of the time, you're writing in bullet points because you're writing notes to yourself. You're writing your teleprompter notes. Your bullet pointed sentences don't help the audience at all. You'll notice, for example, that you will very rarely see a bullet point in my slide decks. Sometimes, yeah, on the rare occasion I might use them. But that constant default to just endless slides of bullet pointed messages and sentences, that's not for your audience. That's for you. Your slides are for your audience. See what you can do to visualize your information rather than just writing out bunches of text. Because if you're just going to write out a bunch of text, that's not a slide deck. That's a document. Write a document and email it to people. You don't need to present it. All right. Images and movement. Embrace photography. Okay, those old clip art photos and the pixelated stretched photos that you grabbed online, those aren't going to cut it. Embrace the tone of your project. If the tone of your project is professional, get some professional images out there. And you don't have to buy them. You can use Unsplash, which is a whole collection of high resolution photographs that are free of copyright. People have just uploaded stuff. You can use Pexels, and you can also use the Noun project, which is both icons and photos. And it's a great archive to gather your images and icons from the Noun project. And do get friendly with icons. A lot of times you can replace an entire bullet point with an icon and a phrase, short phrase. You can find plenty of free icons at iconfinder.com. Also, in PowerPoint, you can use icons as well. There's a direct repository. Sometimes you have to be using the Office 365 version, but you have access to that through the university accounts. I like to build a photo and icon library, so I don't have to go searching for stuff when I'm trying to build my slide. So that, like, I have a whole folder of libraries. I have a whole photo of people. I have a whole folder of people. I like to build them and store them somewhere for easy access. Okay, and I tend to use Unsplash and Icon Finder. If you're going to animate, make sure you know that there's a reason for it. If it's just because it looks cool, it doesn't. Make sure there's a purpose behind it. I do tend to animate quite often, but it's because I'm trying to render the information visible a little bit at a time so it doesn't overwhelm the audience. For example, right now, animate only if there's a reason, like you're trying to show a change in a relationship. Maybe you're trying to signal a direction. Maybe you're trying to show a transition in time or a growth. Maybe, like you're trying to control the eye movement of your audience. I'm trying to guide you with animation to what I want you to see. But don't just animate because you want to. All right, displaying data. I think this is our final section too. When presenting your data, when you're trying to visualize your data, because you don't just want to throw stuff on your slide, let these questions guide you. What do you want people to notice? What relationship do you want people to see? Because when you're using tables and charts and all the visualizations available to you, you are asking people to see a relationship. What is that relationship? Know it and construct your data visualization in a way that shows that. Or as my colleague, Lyle Wright says, and he teaches the data analytics for managers course. What trend do you want to make visible? What's the trend you want us to see? What you want us to notice? That's why you're going to be presenting data. It's not just about throwing everything on the slide. It's about helping us see a relationship or a trend. One thing you can do is, instead of putting all the data in there, visualize the takeaway like I've done here, and then start talking to your audience about how you arrived at that takeaway. By the way, I just made that up. But it's a takeaway, it's a conclusion, and now you can look to me as a presenter to start talking about how we got there. It's a nice way to captivate the audience. Use infographics. Canva, by the way, works with infographics very, very well. Use the right tool. So pie charts and donut charts help to show large differences. So basically dessert charts show large differences. Maybe a bar chart can show more precision. And there's dozens of different kinds of tools to use. I'm not going to sit here and go through all of them. I'm not a data visualization expert by any means, but I will introduce Duarte's formula in Slideology that I think is very effective. So you have your background, right? That's like the tool you're using. Is it a pie chart, a donut chart, bar chart, spider chart, whatever you're using? Then you have the data that you want to put on it. And usually that's all we do. We throw the data on there. But Duarte says you have to add the emphasis. You have to draw our eyes to the trend you want us to see, to the relationship, to what you want us to notice. And only then will you have a strong result. So here's a couple of quick examples I did for you of trying to guide you to the point. So here's the background. It's a bar chart. And there's all the data. We have all the data. And the emphasis is what's in orange. So your eye is going to be drawn to this because this color pops and draws you in the ways the gray doesn't. Here's this pie chart. Again, I'm drawn to the orange and not to the shades of green. Good pop. Here's a line chart. And there's our green stuff that, okay, that's fine there, but you know what? I'm trying to draw your attention to that orange line because it's different than the other lines. And this is, I think, the part where guiding your audience's eyes is really, really important. If you're going to put a table up there, if you don't tell us where to look on that table, if you don't signal in the slide itself where we should look, we are going to look all over the place. We're just going to be roaming around in that big sandbox of data, finding anything we want to find. I want you to look at Q2, so I put Q2 in orange. Okay. Each of these examples draws your eyes toward what the presenter wants you to see. So we've gone over story, arranging items, backgrounds, colors, all sorts of design concepts in terms of movement, text, images, and data. Here's some great resources. There's Nancy Duarte's Slideology, the HBR Guide to Persuasive Presentations. If you're in the 301 course, you have that book and you should be reading it. Gar Reynolds' Presentation Zen. That was actually published quite a while ago. Again, long-term design concepts that will be sustained over time. And then if you're really interested in upping your storytelling and data game, then go ahead. The Storytelling with Data book and Good Charts, the HBR Guide to Making Smarter, More Persuasive Data Visualizations. Great resources. And they really do a deep dive into data visualization and use of story. So I recommend them a lot. And that takes us to the end of slides. We'll be doing a lot of makeovers in class, and we're going to get our slide decks to be designed in ways that are going to help our audience. I'll see you next time.